didn't work the first time. So this is my second favorite part to talk about, because normally I find myself slotted right before the happy hours, which is always amazing. You can see the people, it's like, here. So thank you for letting me be in front of the lunchtime, because that's even better. Also know this is normally an hour-long talk, but luckily for you, I had a 4 a.m. wake up in Chicago, plenty of coffee, and we'll be moving very quickly. As mentioned, Jason Henrich, I'm going to talk a little bit about FinTech Forge and the work we do. By way of background, I've been both an entrepreneur. In 2008, I co-founded one of the world's first challenger banks here in Boston. Before that, was head of innovation for a public company and have also been a venture capitalist. Now, really exciting for me to be talking to a bunch of design folks, because normally I'm having a talk like this with the folks that Greg was talking about earlier, the business folks, because what we do at Forge is help incumbents become more innovative, whether that's an internal innovation or it is partnering with external players. And so we're dealing with the CEOs, the CIOs, the CFOs, convincing them that having customers is not the same as being customer-centric, that lean is not just a type of cuisine, and that design does not mean making things pretty. That's a true story, by the way. And so we do that a lot by addressing the technology and the processes, but we had a discovery about 2 years ago that a lot of what we do is actually around cultural change. And how do you take the behaviors that many of you are so familiar with, and how do you make that permeate the rest of the organization to take on this idea of test and learn, exploring the unknown, and taking on risks? Now, my wife always makes me give the disclaimer with this talk. I'm not an academic, I'm not a psychologist, but I did have one client introduce me to his wife as a marriage counselor for management teams. And I kind of like that one. So, let's talk about growth. At this slide, normally all of the C-level shakes their head and says, yes, growth is good. That's what our shareholders expect of us. And we're going to say, no, we're going to talk about growth and mindset. And most of this today, I'm going to speed through some of the concepts and assume that you know them. So nod your heads if you know them, shake your heads if you don't. And we're going to talk about the why behind them and how it is important to get the buy-in at the top and the rest of the organization for the things that we all in this room already value. So who here is familiar with growth mindset? Fewer than expected, but about a 10x increase over the hands that normally go up. So it isn't just about, the up and to the right of stock price, revenue, and income. Growth mindset was some work pioneered by Stanford researcher Carol Dweck 30 years ago. And what she wanted to understand is performance, specifically performance of children, and why some who had the deck stacked against them performed and outperformed kids who had every benefit in the world. Top tier school districts, access to tutors, loving parents, not worrying about being shot at or where the next meal was. And she wanted to understand why you saw such a great disparity. Was it raw capability over environment? And what she actually found was it was mindset. And so what she unpacked was this idea that there are really two, and a third was later added, which we'll talk about. There is a fixed mindset and there is a growth mindset. A fixed mindset believes that your capabilities are fixed. Okay, she's not a branding expert, but her research is phenomenal. And in the fixed mindset, what she found is my performance was only going to be as good as my inherent capabilities. And as a result, I would always find the opportunities in which I knew I could excel. Growth mindset, by contrast, was always exploring. They actually took failure as a positive sign that it meant you had stretched beyond your existing boundaries, that it meant you had successfully gotten out of your safety zone. Now, do want to give the disclaimer that growth mindset does not mean that it is always going to work out for the better, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But what she found was much more important than raw capability, much more important than the environment, was an internal cultural aspect that said, if I am comfortable pushing the boundaries, if I am comfortable being wrong, I can actually shift my capabilities. Now, this has been proven out over 113 times at the individual level and at the corporate level, that in fact, you can shift your mindset, and that it is mindset pervades much more important than any other factor. So, according to the rules of the American Association of Public Speaking, I cannot give a talk on transformation or innovation without referencing this guy. And rather than just talking about, design God, his zeal for perfection, I instead want to talk about this marvel of technology. Who remembers the Apple Newton? Yes, I love when I talk to an older crowd. We all remember this one. So you would think after spending hundreds of millions of dollars developing the first tablet that was an absolute failure, that the last thing you would want if you worked at Apple was to be on Mobility 2.0, which is what they had named that initial team. It's a little bit like ending up on the QA team for the guillotine as part of the French Revolution. That's not going to work out well. But the reality is, today, the tablet and the iPhone represents over 70% of the revenue and income for Apple. And I'm going to guess with the new iPhone coming out, I have to update that stat very soon. Also can't give a talk on innovation and transformation without talking about Kodak. I don't want to focus on the typical innovation talk, though, which says they had their Kodak moment. They ignored for 10 years what was happening in their labs. How many people knew that actually digital photography was invented at Kodak itself, right? From the belly of the beast. And yes, they did ignore it and actively tried to kill it for 10 straight years. What I want to focus on is what they did next, because Kodak didn't go down without a fight. They actually brought in a new leadership team that had great tech experience. They invested hundreds of millions of dollars themselves in actually navigating the new digital world. And the problem was, the reason it was for naught is their mindset was fixed on what their existing business model was. They had a very early mobile website, an internet-based website called EasyShare. Who remembers uploading your 600 megapixel, really crappy photo up to EasyShare? But what did they ask you to do afterwards? They wanted you to go print it at CVS or Walgreens and make duplicate copies of it. That was their business model. They had a 15-year head start on Facebook. Rather than understanding, they're not in the business of capturing photos. They're in the business of capturing and sharing memories. Very different mindset. Contrast that with the world's largest retailer. Now, before it was popular to be the transportation company that didn't have cars or the hospitality player that didn't have hotel rooms, they decided they were going to be the bookstore that actually had no store. And what they found was, wow, more than books, we're really good at this logistics game. We can sell all sorts of things. Within 48 hours, we can get just about any product on your doorstep. And then they stopped and thought about it and said, well, wait a second, why am I only selling my products? Maybe I'm not actually a retailer. Maybe I'm a logistics company. Why do I carry inventory? I can sell other people's stuff. They can carry the cost of that. They didn't stop there, though. They went a step further and said, wait, I've built all of this infrastructure. I can actually take all of this computing power that I've developed, and I can also license that to other people. Today, Amazon Web Services represents about 10% of revenue and 71% of net income, because they kept questioning, what business am I in? Now, I love that it's actually come full circle. You're like, wait a second, you went all the way up and you are the cloud, and then you just go buy a chain of grocery stores? How does that? I don't know where they're going with that, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be amazing. And they don't stop there. In the financial service world, who saw the very subtle change that happened to your Amazon Prime account when you could store value in your Amazon account, and you could do it by ACH or by card? It was the week before the Whole Foods was announced, so I think a lot of people missed it. Anyone else notice this? You're being incented to store value there. You can check out. Well, think about this for a second. JP Morgan Chase has 60 million customers total. Amazon has 66 million Prime customers that now hold a digital wallet, connected to hundreds of thousands of retailers on the back end. If it were not for Whole Foods, I would have thought like the Visas and MasterCards of the world would be up in arms going, our world is shifting. And why? Because they're questioning, what business are we in? So who's familiar with the innovator's dilemma? I'm going to assume this is one.
that most people know. For those who don't, we'll do a very quick example. Local Harvard Business School hero Clayton Christensen wanted to understand, why do incumbents fall off the top of the mountain? You would think they have scale advantage, they have the advantage of customers, they have advantage of price, they have the advantage of access to capital and markets versus having to go raise money from VCs. And what he found was, once you begin to develop and evolve your product, once you have a product, you tend to actually overinvest and exceed customer expectations. While someone else is starting below customer expectations and they continue to invest and grow, desperately trying not to fail, and they eventually intersect with where those expectations are, only to have the incumbent look back and go, wait a second, I can't compete with that. I like to think of the incumbent as the box of software from Microsoft, where like they keep smacking more features on top of it, and you're like, for the love of God, quit changing PowerPoint and Excel. I just want to do the same things over and over, and I can't find that function back. So, example love to give of this, the mainframe computer. This brought us into the computing world. Today, if it were not for the financial service world, this would be all but extinct. Unfortunately, it's still in a lot of the basements of our FIs. They were replaced by the microcomputer. Everyone from the Massachusetts area knows Dr. Wang and Dweck and company that said, we don't need all of the processing power, but if we push the access out to the edge, that becomes very valuable. And lo and behold, again, the mainframe goes away, only to be usurped by the personal computer, and a quote attributed to Dr. Wang that I love, which is, this is nothing more than a glorified gaming system. There's no way that there will be a day that there's a personal computer on everyone's desktop, only to have this displace, right? If I look out, I see a few laptops, but I see a ton of tablets and even more going to the phone. This is the growth mindset. That mobility group within Apple, instead of saying, yeah, that was a massive failure. In fact, it caused a whole group of executives to get exiled from the company as a result. They said, we had some really important learnings out of this. We think we can do 2.0 better. And today they rule the digital world on the way we all think of our access. So let's talk about innovator's dilemma for financial services. The challenge is we innovate and then we stay the same for a very, 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 very long period of time, right? The greatest innovation often attributed in financial services was the ATM in 1983. Woohoo! We added, this whole idea of digital and mobile, but the reality is we've taken an offline process and we put it online. Have we really rethought what that is? And there's a couple of reasons for that. Our technology ain't so flexible. Our processes are pretty fixed. Our people and the culture we build around it, we do this to be highly scalable, highly reliable, and most importantly, to be compliant. And what this ends up doing is creating a big tension, because now our customer expectations far exceed what we're delivering within financial services. And the bigger that tension gets, at some point it has to be released. And when it happens, the bigger that tension, the bigger and the faster it happens, that we now end up with something that looks like this. And I don't even bother updating the CB Insights graphic, because there's a new one of these every week. You can't even tell that that's Wells Fargo in the background in terms of how the bank is being unbundled. Every part of finance is beginning to be unbundled. So how do you build a growth mindset? Because we had the opportunity, just like taxi cabs, they could have started accepting credit cards. They could have actually made it easy for you to hail and track where they were coming, and they resisted. We as financial services long ago could have said, hey, maybe we could be doing things differently. The challenge is we are an industry that has a lot of fixed mindset. Not all of you. You're the growth mindset people. But at the top of the house, we think of that very much as fixed. For those who work at banks or do any part of lending, talking about taking a 2% loss is like catastrophic. How do you teach those people to say, we're going to go embrace failure, it'll be great, come along? So how do you build it? Well, it does start at the top. And what we have found over and over again, it is great when it is espoused that we are going to fail fast. We are going to do test and learn. Unless at the very top there is an acknowledgement that things not working out right is going to be okay. In fact, if we don't do that, we are in danger of actually getting displaced entirely. If we don't breed that from the very top, it isn't going to take place. And this is actually something when I headed innovation that I felt firsthand, and I see it over and over again, is our CEO would look at me and say, what you're doing is the most important thing in the company. And then he would turn to the head of compliance and say, make sure he doesn't fuck up, right? And so the rest of the organization is like, what are we going to do with this, right? They were put at odds, and anything that I could do that might possibly fail, we spent all of our time, instead of managing the risk, we tried to eliminate the risk. And as a result, the speed of our learning was very slow. A great example of how important mindset is, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a great discourse on how mindset impacted Enron. In fact, they were so talent focused that everyone spent their time puffing their chest, talking about how good they were, believing that it is about capability and where you got your MBA, that no one was willing to admit when things weren't working. And as a result, you created a culture not only of backstabbing, but of doing active cover-ups of the things that didn't work until it actually became a catastrophic sort of failure. So, if you're not familiar with this slide, let's just stop. You go to a different conference. But what Steve Blank brings to the idea of customer development is one that if historically you look at within financial services, we do a lot of incremental improvement. Getting that buy-in from the top that we are going to solve the most interesting problem out there, which we don't even know how to talk about yet or even understand the problem, but this is the idea of co-development of the problem and the solution with our customers is the most important thing we can do to go solve their problems. Great example of this is we do work with one of the biggest cores in the world running innovation sprints with some of their banks simultaneously. It's very scary to have a bunch of their customers in with their product people. And we kind of do it like Google Sprint meets Startup Weekend, so we vote on ideas and people come with ideas, lots of stickies, which the banks all find super innovative because stickies are going up and down the wall. So last year, one of the ideas that was brought by a bank was, we need a print all button added to this. And everyone kind of poo-pooed it on the product side from the core, said, that's stupid, why does that matter? So we did a deep dive into the problem in a way that not even the bank that had brought this problem to the forefront was able to articulate. All they knew is they didn't have access to some data. Fast forward, this product enhancement is now being rolled out because what they really found is they had a data availability issue that was shared with every single bank that was present in the room at the same time. It was a problem that unless you actually dive deep into that problem, you're not going to be able to find a good solution. Test and learn, Eric Ries, everyone knows lean startup, good. What we sometimes lose though is if you get wrapped up on the speed through the cycle, you lose sight of not all failure is good. Don't go, woohoo, fail fast. This is not a millennial soccer game where everyone gets a trophy at the end. As an organization, we need to learn to discern between good failure, that is one that has learning attached to it and that we didn't over-invest in, versus failing in and of itself is good. Great example of this is McDonald's, right? Largest quick serve restaurant, found lots of competition, and America was coming to the realization it was getting fat. So what did? They did some market research. Guess what? People said they would love to eat healthy. Guess what? Your customers are liars. No one goes to McDonald's because they say, I want, a nice healthy salad. Now, luckily, they figured out very quickly as they had rolled it out to spectacular failure that we need to go from growth mindset, we went to fixed mindset, we need to come back to growth mindset. Turns out people show up at McDonald's because they want chicken McNuggets and they want breakfast all day with better coffee options. They pivoted back to the core strength. McDonald's stock up once again, and unfortunately for those of us who did like the snack wrap, no longer on the menu. All right, so an important part of this within financial services is we can skip over the fact that what we call testing is, okay, we did a focus group, we did a proof of concept. For most IT groups, proof of concept means functionally could we connect the two things? And never tested, does anyone actually care? And then we just go scale it up and roll it out to all customers simultaneously. I can tell you a funny story about mobile adoption after this at lunch if you're interested in that. So Inherent in this is recognizing doing something new takes on risk. And as I mentioned, taking on risk is not about risk elimination or running amok and saying, we're taking on all the risks. It's amazing, isn't it? Regulators love this. Like, we're taking on new risks. Do you have a plan for it? Nope. We're just going to run forward. So a new muscle that needs to be developed in the organization is really around risk management versus the elimination. Now, I love, this is a quote because it is really easy, like the conversation about my ex-CEO who would say, we need to be risky, let's not fail. Let's just call out that that actually doesn't exist. Those two circles do not intersect, so let's not pretend that they do. And if you want to talk about the ultimate in fixed mindset, it is often the risk management group. Do I have any risk people here? I don't think they attend this, right? So normally I can tell, like when I'm giving this talk, it's the risk people are, yeah, you look just like him. And it isn't exactly their fault because regulation has largely been looking in the rearview mirror. I like to call our approach to regulation is a lot like building a monument. You wait for something really bad to happen, then you go build something really big, and then no one visits it after it is built, right? Only the pigeons go there. And we never go tear that monument down and say, you know what, we need a better monument. Because this is the approach that happens when you build a monument, is in this big gap. This is where the really bad stuff happens, right? This is where 2008 happened. This is what I worry where we're headed right now with some of the applications of, we're using machine learning to do our underwriting right now. You're like, what does it look like if you say a really down economy? I don't know, but the machine does, right? And we're not actually thinking through, as long as we're in Massachusetts, can call out, part of how Bitcoin is regulated in the Commonwealth here goes back to regulation that was developed for the transport of private currencies by steamship, very applicable, but it's on the books, we didn't take it away. Still gotta comply. And the reality is, we need a model that looks much more like this. In the same way that we do test and learn in incremental builds and rollout of features, this is what our regulatory and risk teams need to learn at the same time. Because the consequence of not doing something is exposing yourself to catastrophic failure. And there was the conversation about when do you bring in risk? Is it at the end? Is it at the beginning? I would argue you bring them along the entire time. Risk needs to actually be your partner through this. Now, they can tell us some healthy things, like if this goes amok, it's going to be catastrophic. And there are other things, once they get comfortable, is, wait, how do we contain and respond when the unknown happens? So again, we can't be looking in the rearview mirror. And the regulators, luckily, are waking up to this, that the old model of regulation, which is let me come in and look at your people and your processes and check a bunch of boxes, now more than ever, we can measure both the intent as well as the outcome because of the availability of data and advanced analytics. So I'll leave you with, well, oftentimes I like to be the chicken little in the room. I think most of you figured out the world is changing. The reality is we expect 4 things from our financial institutions. 1, I want to be able to conduct commerce, e.g. pay for things. 2, I need access to credit, e.g. I can't afford to pay for said things, so I need to spread payments over time. 3, I need somewhere to safely store and accumulate wealth. And the last is, I need to transfer risk, whether that is a loss of a car, a loss of a loved one who is the bread earner, or prices in the future. But nothing says we need to get those functions from a financial institution itself. And so while the industry itself and those functions will survive, the only institutions that will actually be on the surviving end are the ones that address it with a growth mindset and ask continually, what business am I in? I think I actually did the hour's worth in about the same amount of time. So I apologize for the speed of that, and I will be around if you have questions about any of this. Thank you.